War has returned to the heart of the Middle East, and the world is once again watching in horror. The conflict between Israel, Gaza, and Lebanon has escalated dramatically, with rockets, airstrikes, and ground operations devastating communities. But while the headlines tell of military actions and political statements, the real story is about the human lives caught in the middle, innocent civilians trapped in a war that seems to have no end. What led to this latest outbreak, and how does it fit into the larger history of this region? Current situation: a multi-front war. Over the past few days, the conflict between Israel and Gaza has escalated into a full-scale war. Israeli airstrikes continue to pound Gaza, targeting suspected Hamas military sites, but civilians are paying the price. Entire neighborhoods are being reduced to rubble, while hospitals struggle to keep up with the growing number of injured. On the other side, Hamas has launched hundreds of rockets into Israeli cities, causing widespread panic and casualties. Meanwhile, in the north, Hezbollah has joined the fight, opening a dangerous new front along the Israeli-Lebanese border. This multi-front conflict has created a dire humanitarian crisis. In Gaza, food, water, and medical supplies are running out. Electricity is scarce, and displaced families have nowhere to turn. Israel, while more militarily equipped, faces the constant threat of rocket fire, forcing millions of civilians to seek shelter. Across the border in Lebanon, fears are mounting that this conflict will spill into their territory as Hezbollah's involvement increases tensions. Humanitarian crisis, the unseen cost of war. The scale of human suffering in this conflict is unimaginable. Gaza, already under blockade for over a decade, has seen its infrastructure decimated by repeated conflicts. But in this latest war, the damage is even more severe. Thousands have been displaced, their homes destroyed in airstrikes. With limited access to basic necessities, Gaza's population is on the verge of a humanitarian catastrophe. Hospitals are overwhelmed, struggling with a shortage of medical supplies. This war isn't just about politics and territory, it's about the survival of millions of people. In Israel, life is also under threat. Rockets from Gaza and Lebanon are indiscriminately targeting civilian areas. Families are fleeing to bomb shelters in cities like Tel Aviv and Haifa, living in constant fear of the next attack. Both sides are suffering, and for the civilians caught in the middle, the trauma is overwhelming. The historical roots, how we got here. To fully understand the gravity of the current conflict, we have to look back at the long history of tensions in this region. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has its roots in the early 20th century, when the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the British mandate over Palestine set the stage for decades of territorial disputes. After the creation of Israel in 1948, wars and uprisings followed as Palestinians fought for a state of their own. Gaza, now controlled by Hamas, has been a focal point of this struggle for decades. On Israel's northern border, Lebanon has its own complex history with Israel. Hezbollah, a militant group backed by Iran, has long been a thorn in Israel's side. Tensions between Hezbollah and Israel have flared up multiple times, most notably during the 2006 Lebanon War. With Hezbollah's latest involvement in this conflict, we see history repeating itself, this time with even higher stakes. The role of Hezbollah, a dangerous new front. Hezbollah's involvement in the conflict marks a significant escalation. Backed by Iran, Hezbollah is one of the most powerful non-state military forces in the world. Its entry into the war creates the potential for a larger regional conflict, drawing in countries like Iran, Syria, and possibly others. While Hezbollah's attacks on Israel are currently limited to the northern border, the group's advanced military capabilities, including precision-guided missiles, could pose a serious threat to Israel's security. This raises the specter of a much wider conflict, with multiple nations potentially being drawn into the violence. The international community is watching closely, but fears are growing that this war could destabilize the entire region. Global reactions, diplomatic efforts, and international concerns. Internationally, reactions have been mixed. The United States, a longtime ally of Israel, has expressed strong support for Israel's right to defend itself, while urging caution to avoid further civilian casualties. Washington has also called for restraint from Hezbollah and its backers in Iran, warning that their involvement could lead to a much larger conflict. On the other hand, Arab nations have condemned Israel's airstrikes on Gaza, calling for an immediate end to the violence. Countries like Egypt and Qatar, which have previously acted as mediators between Israel and Hamas, are once again pushing for a ceasefire. But for now, diplomatic efforts seem futile as both sides are entrenched in their positions. At the United Nations, there have been calls for immediate humanitarian aid to Gaza, where the situation is dire. The international community knows that without swift action, this conflict could spiral out of control, with devastating consequences not just for the region, but for global stability. The uncertain future, what's next? Where does this conflict go from here? That's the question on everyone's mind. With Hezbollah's involvement, the stakes have been raised, and the possibility of a wider war looms large. Both sides show no sign of backing down, and the longer the fighting continues, the harder it will be to find a peaceful resolution. For the civilians in Gaza, Israel, and Lebanon, the future looks uncertain and frightening. The international community may call for peace, but the underlying issues, territorial disputes, political control, and deep-seated animosities, remain unresolved. Without a comprehensive solution, this war, like so many before it, threatens to leave even deeper scars on the region. This is not just a war between nations or political factions, it's a war that's tearing apart the lives of ordinary people. Innocent civilians, families, children are bearing the brunt of a conflict they had no part in creating. As the bombs continue to fall and the rockets fly, one thing is certain: the human cost is far too high. Until real, lasting peace can be achieved, the cycle of violence will only continue, leaving generations to come to pick up the pieces.